Welcome to Pagan Savage. This time we're going to look at revisionism in history, how facts are rewritten, warped, to mean something completely different to what they had been at the time. Audrey Trushke is an assistant professor of South Asian history at Rutgers University in Newark, New Jersey. She is the author of the revisionist book Aurangzeb. Now, I use the term revisionist quite deliberately because that is exactly what it accurately should be described as in her case. As the Holocaust is commemorated, there are those that continue to deny that it ever even happened. These deniers prefer to call themselves revisionists. Most notable amongst these is the British pseudo-scholar David Irving. The revisionists vary in their methods. They look at facts but warp them into something sinister. They do not deny that no killings took place, but deny there was ever any comprehensive plan for genocide by the Nazis. They even deny the gas chambers. So the Holocaust never actually happened. It was just collateral damage in war. Now, the Holocaust itself is not beyond human understanding. Sad to say, it is in fact firmly within it. This genocide was a result of centuries where indigenous peoples had been massacred and hunted down because they were supposedly from an inferior race. Racism was mainstream and regarded as progressive. In fact, that's what allowed the Holocaust to take place. While conservative forces preferred letting such peoples die out through the process of natural selection, known as social Darwinism, those on the left, the progressives and socialists, preferred a more activist approach, with sterilization through the preaching of eugenics. This race science was combined with denigrating non-Western cultures and beliefs. And it continues. Hence on the BBC News this day, the massacre of Hindus at Gurdwara, Gujarat is hidden under misleading or omitted facts, or the victims themselves are blamed for being burnt alive in the Sabarmati Express train. This would be the equivalent of blaming Jews for gassing themselves in the ovens of Auschwitz. Any complaint made to the BBC about anti-Hindu propaganda that spews out soon gets lost in a maze of Kafkaesque nightmare. A horrible bureaucracy which allows time to elapse so the official channels are used against the complainant. Or they get a brown face to front the excuses, which is almost as convincing as Himmler using the Waffen SS volunteers to show how Nazism was multiracial in its scope. Trushke is but the latest example of a fanatic and prejudiced anti-Hindu mindset. Scholars who have their false narrative of Indian history and achieve what David Irving and other Holocaust deniers could never have achieved in their wildest dreams. The platform or respectability to beat down any opposition. A woke Gestapo. A cancel culture with academic standards as shallow as the Arnheb, the think tank, and pseudo-intellectual body set up by Himmler, and whose ideas were instrumental in creating the ideological foundations that allowed the Holocaust to take place. It must be remembered that many Arnheb members escaped the denazification process that took place in West Germany after the war, and indeed remained active in the country's archaeological establishment for the post-war decades. Of course, the problem is much wider, as Trushke demonstrates. Her anti-Hindu credentials are impeccable. She says Aurangzeb's execution of Guru Tegh Bahadur was politics, and religion actually had nothing to do with it. Audrey Trushke's husband is Tain Ren, a hardcore Christian extremist who wants to convert Hindus, has been caught preaching India in violation of his visa conditions. Now, Mr. Ren's entire family is featured on the website for the First Baptist Church of Monterey, Trushke included. So denigration of all things Hindu is not just an academic exercise for Audrey. ideological necessity, as much as it was for Aurangzeb and Francis Xavier, as it was indeed for the policies of successive American governments that saw the indigenous people of America forced into Christianity and forced to speak English, as were torn from their families and their own backgrounds, their language and their beliefs, and incarcerated in prison-style boarding schools, right into the 20th century itself. Trushke stands firmly in the American tradition of so-called progress when she writes about India in her revisionist style. Ironically, she calls anyone who opposes her as fascist, far-right and intolerant, while following the footsteps of Dr. Goebbels himself. Thank you for listening, and look behind the propaganda. It's masked very easily through gaslighting and use of credentials. Audrey Trushke and others are just a modern-day Arnhub. His ideas are well alive. Thank you.